the Coast Interceptor Command. This station will now leave the air. Put out your lights. This station will now leave the air.
The first night we heard that out here on the coast, believe me, the hair stood right up in our heads, and the lights went out. For the first time in this century, automobiles were gone from the streets, pulled up with the headlamps out. Suddenly, Los Angeles was a silent city, and in the quiet, we all felt kind of solemn, as if we knew for the first time how the man felt who said a generation ago, "The lights are going out all over Europe. God send they go on again in our time." But the next day, the sound came back like a shout. News bulletins every few minutes on the radio, conflicting headlines hitting the streets almost as fast, and we all talked at once. Were there really enemy planes over last night or not? Everybody was hungry for information, which brings us to the hero of this short picture. Everybody knows him. He belongs to one of the largest families in the land. There are thousands of him springing up like skunk cabbage, shooting off his or her face in practically everybody's neighborhood. His name is Blabbermouth, and incidentally, we think of him as a kind of a heel.
If you ask me where our Navy is, it's down at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean. That's where it is. The Japs sunk every darn ship of it at Honolulu. Why, I tell you, there's nothing at all to protect us anymore. Those Japs will be landing here any day now.
While 10 or 20,000 blabbermouths were sounding off over the land, however, there appeared in one Los Angeles newspaper an article that clearly foresaw the great danger in which Blabbermouth could place us. If you were forced to stand ordeal by fire, your only hope of emerging unburned would be to wear asbestos clothes. But to avoid being hurt by rumors, no protective clothing will suffice. Instead, we must carry a yardstick, a standard of values to measure everything we see or hear. For example, our trembling tonsorial artist, when he heard what the local blabbermouth was saying in the first week after Pearl Harbor, might have said to himself, "I know Japan has an excellent Navy. Many an American did underrate it. That the Japanese Navy was victor of round one wasn't a rumor, but a solemn report from the President himself." But even in our blackest hours, these facts blazed out over the Pacific. Before the war started, the combined fleets of the United States, Great Britain, and the Netherlands Indies had at least 16 battleships in the Pacific to the Japs' 11. Japan had 9 aircraft carriers as compared to our 7. But the 7 Allied carriers, being larger ships, could carry almost 100 planes more between them than could the 9 smaller Jap ships. The Allies had 61 cruisers in the Pacific. The Japanese had 49. The Allies had 163 destroyers in the Pacific. Japan had 130. The Allies had 90 submarines in the Pacific. Japan had 75. Total for Japan, 274 ships. Total for the United Nations, 337. And to supplement all this, the air arm of the Allied fleet is 20 times as large as when World War II began. 20 times as large. And incidentally, none of these figures include the vast potential strength of Russia's Pacific fleet, watchfully poised at Japan's back door. But despite these facts, many a rumor boy still insists that our fleet was KO'd at Pearl Harbor, the fleet that has since then littered the Australian seas with flaming Japanese wreckage, the fleet that is at this minute very busy indeed. But of course, mere statistics never baffle a true blabbermouth. Deep down under the ground, he burrows along, still singing his mournful tune.
Maybe so, but you gotta be prepared to fight a war like this one. Why, my brother-in-law Wilbur, you know, the one with the egg-shaped head?
Yeah.
Well, his girl heard a fellow say that the Japs have stocked up on enough iron and oil and ammunition to fight a 20-year war. And now that they took Malaya and the Dutch East Indies, They've got rubber, too.
It is not rumor but fact that Japan has for years accumulated a formidable stockpile by purchasing the discarded odds and ends of the world's junkyards. By using the most ingenious salvage methods imaginable, she is able to convert this material, along with the crude iron ore available from her own limited resources, into a yearly production of 7 million tons of steel. 7 million tons, which is a lot of steel. The United States is producing 88 million tons, which is more steel. Japan produces aluminum, too, 24,000 tons annually. The United States produces 400,000 tons. And that means bombers that can shuttle over Japanese war factories in a long, deadly stream. Then there is copper, without which ammunition can neither be manufactured nor exploded. Japan can actually produce 85,000 tons of copper a year, while all we can turn out annually is 800,000 tons, 10 times more. The boys from Berlin, Rome, and Tokyo have 29% of the world's coal. The Allies have 67%, more than twice as much. Then there is the oil. Ah, says Blabbermouth, they've taken the oil away from us. Forgetting, of course, that every time the enemy swept into an oil field, he found it a flaming ruin. Out of these devastated fields will come very little oil for a long time. Very little to add to the Axis share of just 3% of the world's oil. And although it is true, Mr. Blabbermouth, that the enemy now has access to the world's greatest source of rubber in Malaya and the Indies, we have answers to that problem, too. First of all, there is civilian sacrifice on a national scale, with the family horseless carriage laid up in the garage, while Mother and Dad develop muscles they haven't used for years, thus helping to create the largest stockpile of natural rubber in American history for use on military vehicles. Then there's our infant industry of synthetic rubber, which in 1 year will be 10 times what it was last year. And added to these, there are the tremendous resources placed at our disposal by our good neighbors of Central and South America, potentially the richest source of rubber in the world. And not only rubber, but tin, manganese, chrome, mica, tungsten, and lead, item for item matching the war materials temporarily won by the Axis on the other side of the Pacific. But when arithmetic begins to baffle our hero, he turns to another rumor that has often swept over the entire world. Yes, Homer?
Yeah, but like I was saying before that jerk called you over, that article I was reading said those Nazis and Japs been training for this war ever since they was knee-high. Now, how can people used to peace like we are ever expect to beat them?
We do all right.
Yes, Wang, you're doing all right. In your ancient land, peace wasn't just political talk, but a religion. To steal a slice of your country was as easy as taking candy from a baby, wasn't it? You little farmers of China, they say that when the first Japanese planes flew over you, you couldn't even comprehend what they were. Couldn't imagine the death that would plunge down on you. And this was only yesterday. Yet you Chinese people, the people of peace, learned your lesson so quickly that you made the invaders' heads spin, moving your schools and factories inland, burrowing into your Rocky Mountains. And out of your multitudes, you could produce the leaders of war, too. Chiang Kai-shek isn't old-fashioned. He and his generals learned the art of war when Hitler was still painting breweries. And out of China's heart, he molded an army. And it is said that the Germans believed about the Russians just before it started to grow cold last winter, that they were a nation of industrious, slow-witted people that wouldn't know which end of the gun the bullet came out of. But overnight, the Russians turned from internal development of their country to devote all of their energies to its defense. And overnight, they smashed the most dangerous rumor in the world, the one that said that the German military machine could never be stopped. Destroy one rumor, though, and two more will spring up. Sometimes, the Lord forbid, Blabbermouth appears as the female of the species.
But, my dear, everybody knows the country's just crawling with fifth columnists. Why, just the other day, when I was shopping for a girdle, I went into Mr. Smith's delicatessen. And there was Mr. Smith and that fat wife of his eating sauerkraut in the back room just as bold as brass. I just know they were up to something.
Mrs. Blabbermouth, the yardstick of common sense, reminds us that our own FBI had opportunity to learn a lesson from France and Norway, and learn it well. France had no such roundups of real fifth columnists as is shown in these news pictures. We have had 3 years more than they had to get ready. And there is no moment in the day or night that our FBI is not watching and ready to spring. And did you ever stop to realize that compared to the fifth column that is fighting against the Axis, our traitors are just a bunch of amateurs? Take a look at the map, where directly under the shadow of the swastika labors the fifth column that struggles and gives its blood for us. Untold numbers of temporarily conquered Czechs, Poles, Danes, Norwegians, Dutch, Belgians, French, Yugoslavians, and Greeks. No Axis conqueror but who does not admit the existence of this terrible hidden army that forces him to tie up great forces of occupation throughout all Europe. But despite Hitler's 100,000 spies, he cannot even prevent our hidden allies from listening to secret radio messages, nor wipe out the big V's that spring out mysteriously wherever the Nazi soldier passes. But alas, alas, do you know that there are millions who still believe in the secret weapon rumor? Butch Blabbermouth, of course, is a sucker for this yarn.
Hey, Bill. Listen to this. It says here in Confusing Stories that them Nazis got a new weapon, can fly 432 miles an hour, can land on the water and make like a battleship with 16-inch guns. And on land, it can burrow underground like a mole. Holy smokes. It shoots deadly radium rays, can kill a whole city just like that.
Everything is right about the secret weapon story, except that it just isn't true. So far in this war, authorized military observers have reported no mechanical nor physical secret weapons in use by either side, but only new uses for old tricks. Parachute troops, for example, invented long ago right here in the United States, and definitely no secret, employing suicide units to attain briefly a particular objective, or simply cutting down the manpower of a submarine. Those Americans who still tremble at the secret weapon rumor have forgotten that most of the new weapons of war were thought up by Americans. More than a century ago, the Yankees got together and worked out a contraption that would go under the water, tested it out until it actually worked, and so invented the submarine. It was in the United States, in case you've forgotten, that was invented the first armored battleship that Europeans claimed wouldn't even float. And yet, with these, we changed the history of the world. And not only did we develop the airplane itself, but in 1923, we worked out a stunt called dive bombing. With our schoolboys weaned on 1 million jalopies, we happened to lead the world in mechanical ideas. However, one secret Hitler weapon that is neither steel nor vapor, that moves faster than the swiftest airplanes and is 1,000 times deadlier. Wilbur T. Blabbermouth here gets it like this.
I have it from sources of my own that our so-called allies are already beginning to gang up on us. Well, look at England, for instance. Of course, everybody knows that she'll fight to the last drop of American blood. The only thing that they're interested in is that everybody else go out and fight the battles for them while they sit back and save their own skins. And as for those Russian Bolsheviks, well, they're just biding their time, make a deal with Hitler, and then stab us in the back.
Did you hear that, Walter? Just wait till I tell the boys at the board meeting tomorrow. Heil Hitler. Heil Hitler.
For with propaganda like this, Hitler very nearly destroyed the old world. In Germany itself, he used rumor, first to set capital against labor and labor against capital. And this was the way bitter hatred was created between the Germans themselves, until there was neither free labor, free capital, nor freedom of any kind within the Reich. Everybody lost but Hitler. Learning the technique of rumor propaganda in his own country, Hitler could use it at the time of the Munich Pact to create distrust among allies. He could split the democracies away from Russia by selling them the dangers of communism. And the result? The saddest chapter in all the history of free men. Hitler has carefully laid plans to use exactly the same methods to create dissension in the United States today, divide our loyalties, and then conquer us. But that is one thing that is not going to happen here, Brother Blabbermouth, and this is why.
We have not been stunned. We have not been terrified or confused. The militarists of Berlin and Tokyo started this war, but the massed, angered forces of common humanity will finish it. They know that victory for us means victory for freedom. They know that victory for us means victory for the institution of democracy, the ideal of the family, the simple principles of common decency and humanity. Our task is hard. Our task is unprecedented, and the time is short. We can well say that our men on the fighting fronts have already proved that Americans today are just as rugged and just as tough as any of the heroes whose exploits we celebrate on the 4th of July. When our enemies challenged our country to stand up and fight, they challenged each and every one of us. And each and every one of us has accepted the challenge for himself and for his nation.
Well, I don't know. Mr. Big can talk all he wants to on the radio, but I still heard that if we're gonna win...